Thank you, everyone. Thanks for joining this Thomson Reuters webinar today on how to transform your legal department through self-service automation. Today, we're going to be talking about automating the contract drafting process with some genuine practical how-to guidance from a leading expert in the field with countless implementations under his belt. In addition to contract automation, we're also going to be discussing how the automation of legal expertise can truly help organizations provide benefits, significant benefits to the company as a whole. And again, we'll be providing some very practical how-to guidance and approaches on these types of projects. My name's Andy Wishart. I'm Global Head of Drafting and Automation at Thomson Reuters. I'm a legal technologist with product management responsibility for a range of drafting and automation products at Thomson Reuters, such as Contract Express, Drafting Assistant, and SYKE Legal Search. I was previously co-founder and Chief Technology Officer of Contract Express until it was acquired by TR in 2015. Prior to Contract Express, I was a researcher in artificial intelligence and cognitive science at the University of Edinburgh, and I'm going to try to be using some of that experience to do a little bit of myth busting around automation and artificial intelligence today. I'm really pleased and very grateful to have the excellent Alistair Maiden with me here today on the webinar. I've known Alistair for a number of years, first as a Contract Express customer, and then more recently as one of our valued partners. Alistair, would you like to just briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Thanks for the kind introduction, Andy. So, I'm a legal engineer, and I'm the founder of SYKE, and I'll tell you a little bit more about what we are and what I do in a moment. But in summary, I'm a practicing lawyer, but I have a real focus on legal technology, and I specialize in companies, helping companies to solve legal problems by using technology.
Great.
Thank you, Andy.
Thanks, Alistair. So we've got a really simple structure for the webinar today. I'm going to kick things off first with an introduction to automation, legal department automation, also looking at its relationship with artificial intelligence. We'll then go a little deeper on what automated contract drafting is and the benefits that it brings to the corporate legal department. I'm then going to pass over to Alistair, who's going to be talking about his experiences in legal department automation, talking about the methodology, some success stories from the field with the clients that he has worked with, and then importantly, discussing how to manage change within the legal department when taking on new automation or legal technology projects. Then we're both going to switch gears slightly and discuss a more emerging use case for automation, and that's around the automation of legal expertise. Still there to help business users self-serve, but that might be on a range of compliance, regulatory issues, HR issues. So we're going to go a little bit of focus around that expertise automation as well. Okay, first up, let me just set the scene a little. It seems like each day there is a new article on the transformation of the legal profession through legal technology. You know, and it's sometimes, I think, really hard to dissect this noise and to separate really the hype from reality. You know, on the one hand, perhaps if we look at the Gazette snippet here, on the one hand, we hear that automation will replace tens of thousands of legal jobs. But on the other hand, if we look at the New York Times snippet on the right, then, you know, the New York Times is perhaps more cautious and talk more about the legal technology augmenting and enhancing the capabilities of lawyers. Now, we often see that artificial intelligence and automation are described as the same thing. And I say not so. So today I'm going to try and do some myth busting and show how some automation solutions can bring significant benefits without being badged as AI. Badging something as AI when in fact it's not, it kind of can be understood from a human perspective because we're really at the peak of hype on the AI trend. For example, if we look at this chart, this shows the mentions of artificial intelligence in quarterly earnings calls. So there's some neat technology out there that does analysis of quarterly earnings calls and can slice and dice that data and shows how over the past number of years that the references to artificial intelligence on quarterly earning calls by companies like yours is on a dramatic rise. In fact, it's really pretty staggering. For those of you familiar with Gartner's hype cycle, we can see that machine learning and deep learning, in Gartner's opinion, is peaking or just has peaked. Could we perhaps be on the brink here of deep learning, machine learning AI going through the so-called trough of disillusionment? And in Gartner's hype cycle, trends on the downturn through that trough of disillusionment sometimes fall off. I don't think that's going to be the case for machine learning and deep learning. I think they're going to progress and continue onto the slope of enlightenment and the plateau of productivity. I want to call out the fact that it's machine learning and deep learning in this hype cycle. And maybe perhaps for those less familiar, deep learning is kind of like a subclass of machine learning with its roots more within neural networks. But there are vendors out there that claim to be AI and are riding this wave. But I think the wave is really about learning. And I think that almost a new classification of AI, that you could badge something as AI when it's got that element of learning. And there are some rules-based solutions like our own with Contract Express, perhaps with their foundation in expert systems, which I would not include in that newer-based definition of AI. Just one last comment. If you look down right at the beginning of the innovation trigger, I have no idea what stardust is, but I'm going to ask my wife for a tub of it for Christmas because clearly it's on the rise. Now, automation does not have to equate to artificial intelligence. And I think, the AI hype cycle in some ways is creating AI fatigue. And many of you out there within corporate legal departments are maybe experimenting with artificial intelligence technologies. And perhaps you're finding that actually it's hard. It's hard to understand, perhaps hard to implement those solutions. And the complex engineering requires specialist skills that are often in short supply. The other aspect is AI solutions are not 100% accurate. There are diminishing returns as you continue to train on a large data set. Also, the solutions in legal are limited to a small number of use cases, such as contract review, where these solutions can analyze a document, often a bad scan, even with some coffee stains, to analyze those scans to be able to read that language, interpret that into specific clauses, and maybe even extract some data out of it. But really, if we take a step back, these solutions are really solving a problem of our own making. If we stopped scanning documents, if we stopped taking pictures of documents at the end of their life cycle, but rather relied upon a more structured process to how we draft, create, negotiate, and sign legal agreements, we wouldn't have this problem in the first place. And maybe we could divert the AI technologies onto other, more perhaps meaningful challenges. Just one other thing, AI, not very good at identifying a chihuahua when placed alongside a blueberry muffin. I'm not quite sure what that means for contract language, but I think just points to that difficulty in achieving 100% accuracy. And if you look up comparing animals to food and AI, you get some really cool examples. So what if, what if you could purchase an automation technology and get up and running quickly and experience the benefits really early? And I think automated contract drafting is a great example of that. It's a really established and mature technology. Law firms have been using this technology for over a decade. And I think now we are seeing this translating into in-house, where in-house legal departments can implement and draw benefits from automated contract drafting. Really critical to this is removing that bottleneck within the legal department around contract and processes, but more importantly, that it can empower business users, that they can access at any time of the day. They can be creating contracts on the weekends and the evenings, anywhere 24/7. It's a real enabler. Let's just go a little bit deeper, specifically around automated contract drafting with Contract Express. End users, when creating and requesting contracts, they're doing so through a web-based Q&A wizard. So a wizard that's going to guide them through the specific business questions to configure a particular contract. And those business questions and those business decisions are going to have an impact upon the content of the contract, but also whether that contract needs to be approved or reviewed by a lawyer, the finance team, the sales team, procurement team, prior to going out for signature. That dynamic Q&A wizard, together with the approvals process, is utilizing that rules engine, that rules engine that has perhaps its history within expert systems to determine, what clauses should be included in the configured contract. There are also workflows around e-signature process and the negotiation process to try and keep the contracts digital throughout their life cycle so that we can avoid that inherent problem with taking scanned copies and scribbling over contracts with notes. Now, a key aspect of work that we've been focused on the past 2 years since acquisition is combining that automation technology with practical law content to give our customers a leg up, a starting point with some pre-automated content from practical law editorial team that can be customized and modified to create your own Q&A wizards, your own clauses, and your own structure. This workflow diagram just tries to embody really the automated contract drafting process, where we start out on the left with a business user requesting a contract. If they choose standard options, they're going to go straight to PDF to be able to get that contract signed. But if they choose non-standard pre-approved terms, we might need to get approval from individual business units. Or if the other party rejects the standard contract and requests some changes, we can drop down into a negotiation cycle with those non-standard terms, but capturing that within the automated contract drafting system as we go. When we ask our customers about the benefits and the reasons to implement, efficiency is really important. Reducing external legal spend by bringing in more capability in-house. These are all really important. But interestingly, last time it was compliance. When we asked our customers, it was compliance with the corporate standards. By reducing the options and reducing the user into completing contracts from templates, we can ensure that compliance. The types of documents, there's some low-hanging fruits around things like non-disclosure agreements, but also service agreements, consultancy agreements, revenue-generating contracts like sales agreements, or perhaps procurement-related contracts as well. So a range of different types of agreements where you've got volume, and across really all industries have this particular type of challenge. Finally, just wrapping up that Contract Express piece, I think the importance around pre-automated content from practical law, a simple user experience to help users walk through the decisions that they need to make is really important. The rules engine is doing the heavy lifting that enables non-technologists to code their own templates. And together the system provides that reporting and management information as well. I think before we move forward onto Alistair's piece, let's just have a very quick, super quick walkthrough of that user experience. So here we've got a user configuring a non-disclosure agreement, choosing the other party, which may be linked into the company's CRM or master data system. And then once selecting the other party, choosing options that are going to configure the contract. What type of contract is it? Is it a one-way or a mutual? The length and what's the overall purpose of that non-disclosure agreement? And then downloading the contract. In this case, we're downloading as a lawyer who gets access to the Word document, but a business user would get access to PDF only. And then workflows that can then email those contracts or start the e-signature process as well. Okay, great. Let's just briefly look at just some of the management information that we can extract through that process to, look at, for example, the turnaround times on contracts as well, so that we can measure the ability for the legal team to be able to turn around approval requests and negotiation requests as well. Okay, that's enough from me for the moment. I'm going to pass over to Alistair. Alistair is going to give some practical guidance and insights from his involvement in a number of implementations recently. Alistair, over to you.
Thanks. So if we could just move on to the next slide, Andy. So I thought it'd be interesting to tell you a little bit about my organisation and what we do, just as an introduction. So we're a legal engineering business with a focus on technology, and we help in-house teams and law firms to identify, buy, and then use and implement emerging legal technologies. We are techie, but we're also practicing lawyers, and we find that this enables us to interface between technology and the practice of law. 50% or so of our work is helping organisations which have bought technology to get their templates automated and to get them out to the business for self-service contract creation. So just moving on to the next slide. This is Thomson Reuters legal technology map and tube map, sorry. And just looking at you can see all of the various legal technologies out there. And if you look into the bottom right-hand corner, we have the legal engineers, and my business SYKE is in the bottom right-hand corner. So just moving on to the next slide. And these are just some of the organisations that we've worked for. So you can see that it's not limited to a particular industry. It's across the piece, really. Now, just moving on to the next slide, I haven't always been a legal engineer. Until about 12 months ago, I had a steady job as a lawyer and head of the contract function at Alistair. And I was responsible for all of Alistair's legal arrangements with its suppliers, covering billions of pounds of spend and the purchase of everything from beans and bread to sophisticated technology. Our problem as a team was that we were overwhelmed by the volume of contracts that we had to deal with. And, it's fair to say that we were, like a lot of in-house functions, we were running the contracts function as though it was a mini law firm. So if we were asked to advise on a contract, we would naturally give a Rolls-Royce service. But I think it's fair to say that contracts were over-engineered. We spent too much time on Clause 18.4, which would be the subject of months of debate. And if we were honest, my team would probably give different answers to the same question. Eventually, business colleagues could quite often get bored and they'd cease to provide instructions. And the upshot of that is that contracts would never get signed. And it quickly became clear to me that there was a better way to operate the contracts function. As a base point, we investigated 3 simple metrics. So what percentage of business spend was covered by a contract that we could actually put our hands on? As an average, how long did it take us to get a contract signed? And last but not least, how happy were my team? And it's fair to say that the findings shocked me. Just 40% of the spend was covered by a written contract. Our contract lifecycle average was an incredible 70 days, with many contracts having been in negotiation for years. And it wasn't surprising that my team weren't particularly happy. Contract automation, and specifically Contract Express, was the engine that we used to drive change. We combined it with our existing procurement system, which was SAP and DocuSign, to deliver an end-to-end digital contracts process where any colleague could log on to the system, and by answering a dynamic questionnaire, they could self-serve a draft contract, which could be circulated for governance, and then when approvals were received, it could be digitally signed. The beauty of Contract Express, from my perspective, was that colleagues didn't require any training to use it, which meant that adoption was high. It was like an iPhone. They just got it. We configured the tech to recognize our governance rules and negotiation parameters. So if a colleague wanted to enter into a contract with payment terms which radically deviated from our standard, the system would first discourage the deviation with the rationale behind our payment terms and how they were key to maintaining our working capital. But I think more effectively, they'd let the colleague know that if the deviation would require approval from our feared finance team. So the result of this was that colleagues started negotiating better contracts. Within 3 months, 80% of contracts were dealt with by the system, and the remaining 20%, which were complicated, risky, or high value, got the attention that they deserved. Moving on to the next slide. This is a graphical representation of the impact of our newly digitized contracts process. And looking through, you can see the difference, but I want to focus on the quite remarkable stat, which is that we got the average time to conclude a contract down from 70 days to 5.5 days. And what we didn't do is, we weren't turning around 70-page outsourcing agreements in 5.5 days, but the vast majority of contracts would be concluded in a day. A colleague would meet with a supplier and build the contract at their meeting on their iPhone or their iPad, and they get it signed in the meeting or later that day. And as you will appreciate, they significantly preferred this systematic approach to dealing with me. Moving on to the next slide. Before handing back to Andy, I just want to touch briefly on some of our work for Royal Mail. And this is one of the first major projects I worked on after Alistair. Now, I'm not going to discuss it in detail because there is actually a detailed case study in last month's edition of the Lawyer magazine, but I do want to pull out a few learnings which are interesting and relevant. I joined the project as Royal Mail was trialling Contract Express. And the first thing we did was run a couple of workshops with the senior legal team to understand their objectives and address some of the change management issues which are very typical in automation projects. I'm a convert, but it's important for me never to lose sight of the fact that automation tech and AI does cause some anxiety, as I think Andy described earlier in one of his earlier slides. But I think what's key to successful change management is to ensure that colleagues understand that the tech is designed to help them. It's there to reduce the stress of volume repeat work and boring governance and signature bureaucracy, and really just to enable them to focus on the more complex, rewarding work where they can add value. So to counter anxiety, at every opportunity we communicated the benefits of the system as follows. So we were very keen to note that the system enhanced the accessibility of legal advice, because colleagues could simply log on to the system and create a contract in minutes rather than waiting for a lawyer to respond. And this This obviously led to a corresponding reduction in sales and purchasing cycles. But it also reduced legal team resources, and it enabled them to focus on high-risk and high-value work. Also, contract automation, if it's done properly, does improve consistency and therefore reduce the risk of error. If you, faced with the same instructions, a contract automation tool will always draft the same contract, which unfortunately isn't the case if it's being drafted by lawyers. The other output from the workshop was to establish the criteria for a document being suitable for automation. So what's the business case? And the rationale was articulated along the following lines. If the internal or external team produce or advise on a contract more than 30 times per annum, it should consider the senior legal team to consider whether the activity could be automated. This was based on the following metrics. If the average time spent on creating a contract is 2 hours, and say the average fully loaded cost per hour is set at 250, then 30 times 2 times 250 is £15, which is £15,000, which at this level I think it's appropriate to take a decision as to whether or not the process should be automated. So I think we're now, that's it from me. I think we're going to go on and look at guidance apps.
Brilliant. Thanks, Alistair. So, up till this point, our focus from an automation perspective has been on contracts, on automating the contract drafting process. Now, over the past 2 to 3 years, we've seen many of our customers push the boundaries and the envelope on Contract Express that little bit further, where they're able to leverage the capabilities, the rules-based capabilities and decision tree of Contract Express to automate things other than legal agreements. And, we call these expertise apps or guidance apps where a user can answer a number of questions, and rather than get out of the system a legal agreement, will get some advice or an answer from the system. And Alistair, you and I have worked quite closely on this, particularly over the past 6 to 12 months. And some of the inspiration for this came from observations that you had with one of your favorite iPhone apps. Do you want to just tell the audience a little bit more about your expectations when it comes from legal technology?
No, and I think before I go on to talk about the Good Pub Guide app, I just wanted to give a little bit of context. From an Alistair perspective, and I think it's true with most corporate legal departments, at this point we've gone to the effort of persuading our IT team that we need a specialist piece of legal technology to help us improve efficiency within the legal team. We've gone through that implementation program. At Alistair, what we were doing was fairly new, but it took us approximately a year from the end-to-end process of identifying that we wanted a tool, selecting the tool, buying the tool, implementing the tool, and all of the change management that sat around that. So naturally, once we'd achieved our immediate objectives, my mind started thinking, what else could we use this tool for? How could we leverage that intuitive question and answer functionality, that decision tree functionality, to collect instructions from the business and to produce a legal output, or alternatively just to triage it through to the right person in the business. And I was using the Good Pub Guide one day. It's a very basic example of a guidance app. You tell the app where you are, and it tells you some good pubs in the area. And I just thought, why don't we try using Contract Express for that kind of guidance expert application? Back to you.
Great. When we think about the concept of expertise apps, the commonality with contract automation is self-service. The concept behind both of these use cases is that regular business users can create and access legal capabilities, either through the creation of a legal contract or capabilities where there can be some legal advice. So there are a number of similarities between the two use cases. And Contract Express's rules engine that sits at the heart of the system enables legal engineers or subject matter experts to create rules around regulatory or compliance type issues. Why does Contract Express really play well here? It's because you don't need to have that developer skill set to be able to build these. You can build these with simple drag and drop rule systems within familiar environments like Microsoft Word. If we think about some of the benefits for expertise apps or expert apps, many of them are similar, again, to contract automation. The benefits are around efficiency, being able to deal with a number of requests simultaneously without every individual question coming to the legal department for an answer. Alistair, you and I mentioned that, where does the concept of an expertise app fit nicely? And I think one of the points that you had made is that it's where a simple FAQ isn't enough. And maybe you could talk just a little bit more to that, talking about the sort of dynamic type capabilities that we can have with a more rules-based engine.
Yeah.
But does that, where a simple Q&A is not good enough, does that fit well with the description?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's where you need to, where guidance/expert apps come into play is where you'll have subject areas which are which as a legal team you have to deal with again and again and again, and they really come into their own there. And they're not quite as simple as publishing a set of static FAQs on your intranet. You actually need to go from, you need to take some instructions from a business user. You need to go through a process, and the output will either be delivering some legal advice to them in a pre-approved form, or alternatively, it might be letting someone in the business at a more senior level, or even pushing it back within the legal team, because the system has identified that some kind of bespoke advice is required, or some kind of governance escalation is required. So a really dead simple example of a guidance app or an expert app could be trying to work out whether a contractor or a consultant that you employ within the business is in fact an employee or not. Andy's going to go on and look at something that we've put together on privacy impact assessments. Say this is something that's very topical with GDPR, and the app that Andy's going to show you actually goes through the process of, on a self-service basis, a data owner effectively telling the system about how they're processing data. I think he's going to show us a quick video, which we'll do that now. So do you want to take over, Andy?
Yeah, so here we're with the first page of this guidance app, we're just providing some simple instructions to give context to the end user. There are multiple sections within this expert app. You could see on the left the progress as the user walks through the app. So this particular user, business user, is working on a specific project within our fictitious Kerboda company, and we're asking questions about the types of activity involved within this project, and then also the types of data that's been collected as well, what perhaps the purpose of the project is.
Yeah, and critically, where you can see the question on, has the personal data security team reviewed the activity from a data perspective? What we're doing is we're going through this. Apart from finding out, how the data is actually being used, we're also working out whether we need to trigger review and assessment from other teams and other individuals within the organization. And every single piece of data we collect here is being recorded and is actually being keyed in. There's a risk score behind every question. So you can see the output here. We have a ready-made privacy impact assessment.
Yeah, I think just the end of the video there just finished, but one of the outputs in this particular expertise app was the risk scoring. I think this particular user scored fairly low. It was a risk scoring of 9. And I think that only triggered some informational alerts to the information security team or the data privacy team. And then I think the last thing that we saw there was the report that came with the completion. So, part of the output is just that report that can be filed away that contains all of the answers.
And I think it's important to note, actually, just before we go on, Andy, that, from a practical perspective, we're actually using a variant of that app for clients who have GDPR issues, just to try, and I think it's a really effective way of going through that data mapping exercise and just understanding, collecting information and collating risk.
Great. We're just coming up to the point to wrap up the main body of the content, and then we're going to move into Q&A. I just wanted to finish off really here with just a summary of what we've covered so far. And I think, I really want to lead with that concept of this. This really is self-service contract automation, self-service expert automation. These are mature, robust technologies with quicker implementation times, perhaps compared to other legal technology solutions out there. And I think one aspect of trying to quicken up that implementation time is around combining that legal technology with our practical law content, that pre-automated content, giving companies a head start within their automation efforts. But you could build your own content as well, perhaps as subject matter experts within your legal department, or perhaps also through an engagement with legal engineers like Alistair at SYKE. A critical aspect for any type of self-service app within a corporation is that ease of use and the easy user experience, and how you can enrich that Q&A process with your own guidance, with your own contextually relevant information about your business is going to guide the user through that decision tree. We're able to leverage the workflows for compliance in both use cases, both for contract automation. We need those legal workflows to approve contracts when they're non-standard, and then even more so for the expertise use case, where the data that we've collected, we actually have to act upon. And I think we also touched on the importance of that e-signature process, which keeps the contract digital from soup to nuts, from beginning to end. That if we can keep the contract digital, we could store the contract digital with its data set, and we don't need to rely upon photographs of signed contracts that we then have to scan at a later stage, when perhaps we have to go through some regulatory change that requires those contracts to be repapered. If we have the data set, we can repaper with an updated template without relying upon understanding what's been in those past contracts. Any further closing points there?
I've just been looking at the questions as they're coming in. So,
shall we move on to some of the Q&A? Let me review some of the questions that have come in.
Yeah, shall I
go
answer
ahead.
the one that's easy, actually? So someone's asked that I managed to persuade the Asda IT team that I needed a bespoke legal system, and how did I do this? And that's a really interesting question, because this is a challenge that literally all of my corporate clients have this problem. Most organizations will have an SAP, they'll have a Salesforce or some kind of equivalent of those systems. And the challenge from the IT function is, SAP, for example, has a contracting module. Why don't you just use that? And the truth is, I tried to make SAP work from that perspective. I spent 2 weeks in Bentonville, Arkansas, with the Walmart IT team, Walmart own Asda, for anyone who wasn't aware, trying to make SAP work, but it's just not a point legal system. It's not designed for lawyers, and I think you have to kind of go into detail on that and just show how, show the extent that it doesn't work. And I think that the way you do that in practice is, get together your IT functions with your procurement functions, your sales functions, and your legal functions, and get some demos of the various products, and it will immediately become clear that your point contracting solutions are much better from both a user interface perspective, but also a functionality perspective. And also, if you drill down into the detail and you produce a good set of requirements, characterizing all the things that you would need such a system to do, it will quickly become apparent to your IT colleagues that the kind of bolt-on modules to the procurement and finance products don't cut it.
Perfect. Really good question. We've got another one up here that let me pick up. So I understand from my IT colleagues that Contract Express will shortly be replaced by a new product software. Is this correct? If so, what will the main improvements be, and when will this be available? So we are updating the Contract Express software all the time. We've got a new release coming out in early January, again, one in summer of next year as well. There's no plans to replace Contract Express, just incremental improvements as we go throughout the next couple of years based on our roadmap. Currently today, many of our customers are making use of the technology on guidance apps. We've got some further improvements coming into next year to make that even easier to build those guidance or expertise apps. More integrations with line of business systems to be able to, I think in the example we saw how the user selected from an internal CRM system or database of customers. We're improving those integrations with other line of business systems. So not replacing, evolving, and bringing out new features on a regular basis. Alistair, anything that you want to pick up there?
There's a couple of great questions there that someone's asked, I noticed that you've covered most of the process. Is there anything to speed up and manage the negotiation process? That's a great question. The negotiation process and my lawyers having to repeatedly negotiate the same points again and again was, much of the fat in the contracts process at Asda. And what we did was we configured Contract Express to automatically respond to those frequently negotiated points. So we would ask a supplier to select, to obviously note down what their issues with our standard contracts, standard templates were. And it would typically be things, the predictable things, liability, warranty, indemnity, IPR, all the things that your teams will be negotiating again and again. And what we could do is actually get the paralegals in our team to input those issues into Contract Express. And then by selecting from a series of options, they could see guidance which had often been written by me or one of the other senior lawyers on the particular issue. They could, and then by selecting from a series of options, they could produce a response to the supplier. They could produce a red line of the standard template, and if necessary, they could produce an approval form for one of the senior lawyers to review and approve. I think there's another question as well about law schools and cultural shift, and should they be teaching this kind of thing at law schools? And it's really interesting actually, because I was about a month ago, I was at the Legal Geek event, which is one of the best events for learning about new and emerging technologies, and it was really encouraging to see that there are a number of universities there And in fact, one of my colleagues, Andrew Darnton, last week went to speak at the University of Manchester and just talk to the students there about the role of legal engineering, the importance of legal technology, the necessity as a junior lawyer of learning about this stuff and embracing it. And we're very hopeful that we will be able to turn that into a regular slot, not just for Manchester University, but for some of the law schools as well.
Great. I think there was a technical question around integration with Contract Express and integration with Microsoft Dynamics. So we can integrate with Microsoft Dynamics, get access to that data if you're using Microsoft Dynamics CRM or the ERP versions as well. We can get access to that data and pull that data into the contract request as well.
What about the governance question?
Yeah. Do you want to pick up the governance question?
Sure. So one of the questions is about the hidden risk to a project like this being the lack of corporate governance, which can shift quickly with new appointments. I think absolutely that's a problem within every organisation that I've worked with. I recently got towards the end of an implementation project and said to the client, right, we now need to key this into your approach to corporate governance, and they admitted somewhat ruefully that they didn't actually really have a fixed approach to corporate governance. One of the first things we do with clients now on projects is to understand their approach to corporate governance and to make sure that is simple, straightforward. There's a complete clarity about whose approval is needed for anything. And I think one of the advantages of going through the process of implementing corporate contract automation tools is it forces you to think holistically about your contracts process. And it's an opportunity to look at things like governance and to really rationalize those and ensure that they're harmonized across an organization. And then once it's actually keyed, what we found at Alistair, once it was actually coded into our digital contracts tool, it stuck. So there was much less of a problem of shifting sands, so to speak, when new people were appointed.
Great. I think this is another one for you, second bottom here. Why would a user not choose the path of least resistance? So if there was a less favorable indemnity wording, which could be selected through the Q&A process, why wouldn't procurement or sales users go to that path of least resistance with less favorable language to get the deal done quicker?
Yeah, well, the simple answer to this is my experience of dealing with procurement people or salespeople or basically anyone in a commercial role is they see the legal process as an obstacle to be overcome. So if they know they can get their contract straight away, they see that rather than the relative legal terms as being the path of least resistance. So if you tell them, well, you can select this indemnity wording, but it's going to require approval from one of the senior lawyers, or you can select these lesser payment terms, but again, that's going to require approval from the finance director. In all of my experience of doing this, I found that the commercial colleague will select the option likely to get them their signed contract as quickly as possible.
Great. Let me pick up this last one that's just come in here. Does this also function as a repository of sorts? So certainly for the contracts that are being requested through the contract template system, through the automated system, all of those contracts once signed are being stored within Contract Express, and we can search for those contracts. We can look at the data behind those contracts. I don't regard it as a full repository capability where you're going to drop in any contracts. It's a repository for those automated contracts that have been created through the tool. I hope that makes sense. Let's just have a look to see if we've missed anything. So it does there's a little bit around, I think 2 questions around the access or role for the lawyer on the other side. Do they need a subscription to Contract Express in order to negotiate? So the answer to that is no. The negotiation, we have a particular view that lawyers love Word and lawyers love Outlook, and they like working on those negotiations offline. So we built tools within Microsoft Word to assist the lawyer with that negotiation exercise. That when they perhaps receive a red line back from the other party, they're able to work on those red lines, negotiate on those red lines. But if some of those red lines mean a change in the data that was used to generate that contract, we can synchronize that data back into the system to make sure that the data record for that contract is up to date. So we have a tool within Microsoft Word that helps and assists with that negotiation exercise, but the negotiation exercise is in Word, and the other party on the other side doesn't have direct access into Contract Express.
Andy, can I pick up another question as well on, and I think it's in terms of user adoption, is how do you prevent the perception that this is just another IT system that business colleagues have to use? How do you get them to adopt it? This is something that SYKE are super focused on. It's easy to lose sight in any IT implementation. And, forgive me, Andy, I'm not trying to criticize the techie guys, but I think there's a danger with technical people that they become quite internally focused on the product itself, whereas we try to focus very much on the user experience. It's all about user adoption, simplicity. Going back to that point that I made in my introduction is, can we make this as simple as using an iPhone? And if you can get there, and if you can genuinely deliver something that doesn't require any training, people will adopt it.
Absolutely.
However, if there's any kind of confusion, if they have to pick the phone up, or they get into that kind of computer says no scenario, they'll lose trust and they won't adopt it. And this is a big strength of point legal solutions like Contract Express over SAP and over other systems, which, to be honest, are quite complicated and quite confusing.
Great. I think, do we have any more further questions there that we've had a lot of questions in, which is fantastic, and a lot of really positive comments, which I'm very grateful for. Just check if there's this one quickie. Will this integrate to corporate records management system? There are capabilities within the solution to get data from a range of your line of business and corporate systems. We can connect directly into those databases. We can connect through their web services to get that data in. Generally, we can get the data into a Contract Express questionnaire from pretty much everywhere, but with perhaps some implementation work to do so. Pushing contracts out is another aspect of what we do. So perhaps once the contract has been created and signed, it needs to be pushed out into another system for final storage. And that might be a system like a document management system, content management system, or SharePoint. So pulling data in to configure the contracts and pushing the contracts out at the end are capabilities within the system.
Can I just pick up that final question, Andy, that's come through, which is one that's close to my heart now. So I think the question was, there's great scope for use of a system like Contract Express in large corporates like Alistair, but do you think it's applicable similarly for smaller and growing businesses? Look, my business has 5 employees, and my answer to this question is absolutely. It's a brilliant way. I don't have any time now, really, even though I'm a contracts lawyer, I don't have any time to deal with contracts. So the ability to just, with every new client engagement, to jump on, to create a contract in minutes, to get it out there and get it signed, is invaluable to help grow the business.
Great. Fantastic. So I think let's wrap up there.
Yeah, thank you.
Alistair, I'd like to thank you again for taking the time today for this session. I thought it was fantastic and moved in ways that we hadn't predicted, with some great questions from the audience. I'd like to thank everyone that joined the webinar today and for staying on so long as well. So really good questions, and thank you very much. And to Sophie and the team here at Thomson Reuters for getting everything up and running in time for the webinar. So we look forward to perhaps another webinar sometime in the new year. Reach out to your Thomson Reuters account managers. Check out our website for more information.
Yeah.
If you want to find out more information about Thomson Reuters products, you can do that from the Thomson Reuters website, and also to reach out to Alistair on SYKE.
Just have a look at my website, syke.tech, or just link in with me. Happy to pick any of the questions up further, or share some of my experiences in more detail. Thanks.
Great. Thanks. Have a good day.